She wasn't being difficult. She was running a diagnostic, and you failed it before you realized it had started. That is the part that should disturb you. Not that she tests, every woman does, and the ones who matter test hardest. But that the test was already underway while you were still trying to say the right thing, still trying to manage her reaction, still trying to be understanding enough, patient enough, available enough to make the discomfort go away. You walked straight into it with your hands open, showing her everything she needed to see. Most men spend their entire relationship experience reacting to tests they never recognized as tests. They think they're navigating a moody woman, a difficult conversation, an unreasonable demand, a sudden coldness that came from nowhere. They manage these moments the way they manage problems, with effort, with explanation, with the particular desperation of a man who is trying very hard not to lose something. And in trying not to lose it, they lose it. Picture this. She says something cutting, not vicious, but sharp. An edge in her tone that lands somewhere real. He feels it. His instinct is to smooth it over immediately, to apologize, to explain himself, to soften the atmosphere. He does all of those things quickly, efficiently, with the practiced speed of a man who has learned that her discomfort is his emergency. She watches him do every single one of those things. And something in her goes quiet. Not satisfied, not grateful. Quiet in the way that happens when a question has been answered with an answer she didn't want. The test wasn't about the argument. The test was about who he became under pressure. And he showed her. This video is not a manipulation guide. It is a psychological map of what she is actually measuring, why she cannot stop measuring it, and why the men who pass these tests never needed to study for them. What comes next will expose patterns you've been living inside for years. You have felt this before. The particular confusion of a man who did everything right and still ended up on the wrong side of something he doesn't fully understand. She went cold without warning. Or she made an unreasonable demand and watched how you handled it. Or she picked a fight over something that made no logical sense. And when you responded with patience and calm explanation, the temperature dropped further instead of rising. Or she pulled back affection at the exact moment you needed reassurance. And your need for reassurance was visible, which made everything worse. You responded the way any reasonable person would. You tried to fix it. You offered explanations. You asked what was wrong. You adjusted your behavior to reduce her discomfort. You demonstrated, through 100 small acts of accommodation, that her emotional state was your primary concern. And it never worked the way it should have worked. The pattern drains men in a specific way. It is not the anger of conflict. It is the confusion of a man who is trying hard, doing the logical things, demonstrating all the right qualities, and still failing to produce the response that should logically follow. He becomes exhausted not by the effort but by the absence of the equation working. Input does not produce expected output. And without understanding why, he simply keeps increasing the input. A man tries to resolve a cold evening with warmth. The warmth is received passively. He tries harder. She becomes slightly more distant. He asks if she's okay. She says she's fine. He knows she is not fine. He asks again. She says she doesn't want to talk about it. He stays nearby, available, visibly waiting. She feels the waiting like pressure against her skin. He thought his availability was care. She experienced it as confirmation of something she was testing for. The brutal contrast. The man who pulls back, who returns to himself, who becomes genuinely unbothered, that man produces a different response without changing a single word. Because the test was never about the words. It was about what his behavior revealed about who he was underneath them. Understanding what she was actually measuring is where this changes permanently. Female testing is not a manipulation tactic. This is the first thing that needs to be understood clearly. It is a survival mechanism, ancient, largely unconscious, operating beneath the level of deliberate thought. A woman's nervous system is wired to identify, before full investment, whether the man in front of her is genuinely strong or merely performing strength. Whether his confidence is structural, built into who he is, or whether it is a presentation that will crack under the specific pressure of her displeasure. This distinction matters enormously at the level of biology. A man who is strong under favorable conditions is not reliable data. Conditions change. A man who is still himself under pressure, who holds his ground when she pushes, who doesn't need her approval to maintain his composure, that man is a different category of information entirely. Call this integrity testing, the process of applying pressure to see whether the structure holds or whether the facade separates from the foundation. The tragedy for most men is that they experience these tests as relationship problems to be solved, not as evaluation mechanisms to be navigated. So they apply relationship problem logic. Communicate more, explain better, demonstrate that you care, show her you're not a threat, make her feel secure. Every single one of these responses, however reasonable they sound, communicates the same thing to the part of her that is actually running the test. The pressure moved him. Here is the contrast that reveals everything. Two men receive the same cold treatment. Same scenario. She goes quiet, creates distance, waits. The first man notices the shift, feels the anxiety it produces, and begins managing it. He reaches out. He softens. He increases his warmth in proportion to her withdrawal. She watches the correlation. His behavior is governed by hers. The second man notices the shift, feels the same anxiety, and, because his stability does not require her temperature, continues being himself. He doesn't become cold or aggressive. He simply remains, occupied, present without being desperate. Picture her watching that second man from across the room. He's reading. He's not checking if she's still cold. He has not organized his evening around resolving her mood. Something shifts in her before she consciously understands why. The man who passes the test never knew he was taking it. He simply never stopped being himself long enough to fail. What this looks like in the specific texture of daily moments, that is where the recognition becomes impossible to escape. She doesn't announce the test. She never does. She simply creates a condition and observes what it produces. The first type arrives as manufactured coldness. Something shifts in her energy without explanation. She was warm yesterday. Today she is flat, slightly withdrawn, offering minimal engagement. The man who has not been tested often, or who has failed tests consistently, experiences this as a problem requiring his immediate attention. He moves toward it. He asks questions. He tries to restore the warmth by generating more of his own. She watches how quickly his mood follows hers. She watches whether he needs to resolve her distance to feel okay. The test is not the coldness. The test is what he does with his own internal state when she withdraws hers. The second type arrives as an unreasonable position. She takes a stance on something, a decision, an opinion, a demand that is slightly outside the boundaries of what he would reasonably accept. Not grossly unreasonable, just enough to require him to hold his ground. The man who fails this test does so by caving, not because he changed his mind, but because her displeasure created an emergency he needed to resolve. He walks back his position with explanations that sound like logic but are actually anxiety in a blazer. She did not want him to agree with her. She wanted to see whether his position survived her disagreement. A man who folds under her pressure is telling her something she will not forget. The third type arrives as comparison. She mentions someone, a colleague, a friend's partner, sometimes an ex, in a context that places that person's qualities adjacent to his. It lands somewhere uncomfortable. The man who fails this test reacts. Defensiveness, jealousy, an urgent need to justify himself, to establish that he is better, more worthy, more deserving of her confidence. The reaction itself is the failure. It reveals that his sense of worth inside the relationship is conditional on her confirmation of it. The reframe that reorganizes everything. She is not trying to hurt him with these moments. She is trying to locate him, to find out whether the man she is building something with is still in there beneath the warmth and the effort and the careful presentation. When she locates a man who remains himself under pressure, who holds his ground without aggression, who is visibly unbothered without being cold, she finds something she doesn't find often. What that discovery reveals about the nature of attraction is darker and more permanent than anything in this section. Here is the full psychological truth, and it cuts cleanly through everything comfortable. A woman cannot consciously decide to find a man attractive. She cannot will herself to respect someone her nervous system has cataloged as unsteady. She cannot override the data her testing behavior collected, the data that says, when pressed, he moved. When I withdrew, he chased. When I created pressure, his entire composure reorganized around managing my reaction. That data is not a judgment she is making. It is a record she is keeping. And the record governs what she feels, not what she thinks she should feel, not what she wants to feel, not what the length of the relationship or the quality of his devotion says she ought to feel. What she actually, involuntarily, honestly feels. A woman does not choose to stop respecting a man who consistently fails her tests. It happens beneath the level of choice, the same way you cannot decide to find a food appealing after you've tasted it and your body has already rendered its verdict. This is the line that generates debate, but it holds under scrutiny. Testing is not unfair. It is the most honest thing she does in the relationship. Because the man who passes, who remains grounded, who holds his position with quiet certainty, who does not need her temperature to regulate his own, that man is not passing a game. He is revealing a character that is actually present. The test didn't create his strength. Found it. The man who fails reveals something equally real. His comfort requires her approval. His composure is conditional. The stability he presented during favorable conditions was not structural, it was atmospheric. And now that she has applied pressure, she knows. Picture a man who has failed the same test across 3 different relationships. Different women, different specific scenarios, same fundamental failure. He always moved when they pushed. He always needed the warmth to return to feel okay. He was always, when it came to this particular thing, not quite himself. He carries no understanding of why his relationships follow the same arc. He believes he simply chooses difficult women. He has never once considered that the difficulty was the test, and the test was always revealing the same thing. The women were not similar. His response to pressure was, what lives beneath this is the most important shift a man can make. Not in his behavior, but in his interior architecture. The shift from a man whose stability is borrowed from her mood to a man whose stability is structural, built, owned outright. That shift does not happen overnight. But it starts with understanding exactly what is being measured, and choosing consciously to become the kind of man that measurement cannot shake. The shift is not tactical. Any man who approaches this as a series of moves, stay quiet for this long, don't reach out for that many hours, deliver this particular kind of response, is still failing the test. Because the test is not measuring his behavior. It is measuring his interior. And the interior cannot be faked across the duration of a real relationship. What actually changes when a man understands this is not his strategy. It is his relationship with his own emotional stability. He stops treating her mood as information about his worth. He stops reading her withdrawal as evidence that something is wrong with him. He stops using her warmth as the metric by which he assesses whether the relationship is okay. He develops, through genuine interior work, not performance, a baseline of stability that does not require her input to maintain. A man with that baseline responds to her coldness differently. Not coldly. Not with calculated distance. With the particular calm of someone who is not frightened by her emotional weather because his footing does not depend on it. He is still caring. Still present. Still fully there. He is simply not governed. The man who cannot be moved by her withdrawal is the man she will spend the most energy trying to reach. Contrast this with the man who is visibly affected by every shift in her temperature, whose confidence visibly shrinks when she goes quiet, whose posture changes when she's cold, whose mood tracks hers with the obedience of a satellite. She feels that tracking. And what she feels is not love for the man who cares so much. What she feels is the weight of being someone's primary emotional regulator. That weight, over time, produces contempt. Not loud contempt, quiet contempt. The kind that arrives in the increasing frequency of her tests and the speed at which she delivers her verdict on the results. If something in this is reaching you, if you can feel the specific pattern being described landing in your own experience, stay with it. Because what follows is the part that actually changes behavior. Here is the warning. Understanding this intellectually and applying it are separated by a distance that most men never cross. A man can hear everything in this video, nod through all of it, feel the recognition of his own patterns, and then return to the same behavior the next time she creates a test. because the behavior is not caused by ignorance. It is caused by the anxiety that arises when her warmth disappears, and that anxiety does not care what he knows intellectually. It only responds to what he has built interiorly. The lesson is this: the only test preparation that works is the one that happens before the test arrives. A man builds his interior stability, his genuine, non-performative groundedness, not in the relationship, but in his own life. Through purpose, through the daily practice of being someone, through the slow accumulation of evidence that he can trust his own judgment and stand in his own worth independent of any external validation. That man, when the test arrives, does not need to remember the strategy. He simply responds from who he already is. The man who passes consistently isn't managing her. He's managing himself. And he started that work long before she walked into the room. Picture a man who has done this work. She goes cold one evening, the particular engineered coldness of a woman who is checking whether he's still there beneath the warmth. He notices. He feels the familiar pull toward managing it. He lets that pull pass. He returns to his book. He makes himself a drink. He is present without being frantic. He is warm when spoken to, contained when not spoken to, entirely himself across the duration of her test. She comes to him an hour later with a warmth that is genuine. Not the performance of warmth, but the actual thing, produced by the relief of finding him still standing. The man who fails this same test is sitting in the kitchen 20 minutes in, composing a message asking if she's okay. The cost of never learning the difference is not one relationship. It is the recurring loss of every relationship that actually mattered. This is the full picture assembled, and it does not soften at the end. She was always measuring something. Not because she is manipulative, because she is wired at a level beneath conscious choice to determine whether the man she is building something with is actually as grounded as he appeared in the beginning. Whether his confidence was structural or atmospheric. Whether his composure survives pressure or only exists in its absence. Every unexplained coldness. Every unreasonable demand. Every moment of manufactured distance. Every test she ran, consciously or not. She was asking the same question in different language. Are you still there when it costs you something to be? The man who passes is not the man who says the right things or reads the right tactics or applies the right strategic pauses. He is the man who never stopped being someone. Who built a life and an identity that does not require her temperature to function. Whose stability comes from what he has built inside himself, not from what she provides through her warmth. She is not testing whether you love her. She is testing whether you exist independently of that love. That is the distinction that changes everything. That is the thing most men spend their entire relationship lives missing. Chasing her approval in the exact moments she needed to see his independence, softening in the exact moments she needed to see his ground, explaining in the exact moments she needed to see his silence. If this channel is delivering clarity you haven't found elsewhere, the kind that names the actual mechanism rather than offering comfortable nonsense, subscribe. More is coming, and it only becomes more precise. If you know a man who is currently inside the cycle this video described, failing tests he doesn't know he's taking, confused by patterns he can't name, share this with him. It may be the most useful thing he encounters this year. Leave a comment with this: what is the specific moment where you realized you had moved when you should have held your ground, and what did it cost you? Because that moment, the one where you folded and felt it, is the beginning of the only education that actually holds. The test was never about whether you could win the argument. It was about whether you were still standing after she made losing look like the easier option.